My Section 8 tenant just broke my toilet and it's gonna cost me $1,000 to fix. What do I do? If this sounds familiar, you're making a huge mistake with your rental lease agreements. I own 153 Section 8 rental properties that bring me over $200,000 a month in guaranteed rents every single month, and there's nothing more that I hate than unnecessary expenses on a property. Today, I'm gonna show you exactly how to structure your lease agreements to protect you from any expensive repairs, tenants locking themselves out from properties, and any other major headaches that eat into your profits on a month-to-month basis. These are 3 major clauses in my lease that I'm gonna go over that save me tens of thousands of dollars every single year. And if you stick around to the end of this video, I'm actually gonna show you exactly where to download the exact lease agreement that I use for all of my Section 8 rental properties. Let me show you why having a bulletproof lease agreement is extremely important for your first line of defense for your rental portfolio and any unexpected expenses that could come along the way. Most landlords use generic lease agreements they download online that puts all the blame on the landlord and takes all the pressure off of the tenant. And a lot of landlords use generic lease agreements that do not address Section 8 specifics that you need to have in your lease to get started. Section 8 tenants have different incentives and rules than your average tenant, and a properly structured lease can save you tens of thousands of dollars every single year in potential maintenance costs. It'll clearly define the responsibilities between you and a tenant in any given situation. It protects you legally if any issues do happen to arise. It helps maintain your property value long-term additionally, and without the right clauses, you're gonna be on the hook for every small repair and potential issue that pops up. I've even seen landlords lose all their monthly cash flow due to unnecessary maintenance expenses that could have easily been avoided. Now let me show you the exact clauses that I use in my lease live right now. Now at this point, let's go over the residential lease agreement that I use with all of my Section 8 tenants. We could briefly run through all the clauses, but truly the 3 at the end are going to be the most important that you need to have in your lease if you're going to do Section 8. Obviously, number 1 is essentially just going over the property address and that it's only to be occupied by the tenants. Number 2 is going over the specific term of the lease. Generally, I prefer to secure 1 to 2 year leases with all of my Section 8 tenants. Number 3 is going over the rent, obviously, and it's going over the late fees if they do not pay their portion on time. Now, obviously, with Section 8 tenants, the government is covering anywhere from 70 to 100% of the rent every single month, so their portion is pretty minimal regardless. Number 4 is the security deposit, which generally is going to be the same as the rent every single month. And number 5 is going to be the utilities, and obviously the tenants are going to be paying the utilities every single month. The reason for that is because I do not want to be responsible for anything along those lines, whether or not they leave the tub on, whether or not they leave the shower on, or they have excessive use. I personally do not like to have any of that in my name. Number 6 is going over the tenants, maintenance, and repairs responsibilities. This is pretty vague right here, but it does go into huge detail at the end, which I will get into relatively soon. Number 7 goes into whether or not they're allowed to have pets in the property, as well as how long guests are allowed to stay. The reason that we have this is just because we do not want individuals saying that they have cousins coming in town, family coming in town, and they end up living there for the entirety of the lease. Number 8 essentially just goes over the use and conduct of the specific property, and obviously this one is pretty self-explanatory. Number 9 goes over violating any HOA rules. Now obviously for me personally, I'm not buying in any HOA, but we still have it in there regardless. And number 10 goes over the landlord's entry within the property. Now most of my properties are in Louisiana and Ohio, where we could essentially enter the property within a 24-hour notice, which makes it extremely landlord friendly for me. Now obviously if you're buying in California, sometimes you have to give them a 72-hour notice, you have to give them a week's notice, or potentially even a couple weeks just to enter the property, and thus I only buy in landlord friendly states. 11 goes over any potential alteration. Now obviously I don't want tenants going into the properties, painting the walls different colors, redoing the floors, doing any of that kind of stuff. We prefer if they were to do anything, they need to let us know before anything happens. Number 12 goes over any insurance and liabilities within the specific property, and although we do not require them to carry renter's insurance, we definitely advise it. Clause number 13 goes over any assignments within the property or subleasing. The reason for that is because obviously I do not want any of my tenants potentially turning this into an Airbnb and having random visitors and guests come into the property every other day. I've seen landlords forget to put this in, and it's caused a huge mess within their property, and it costed them tens of thousands of dollars. So you definitely want to have this one in there. Number 15, pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, going over the tenant should not let any mold grow on the property. Like if there was a potential leak or something along those lines, they definitely need to notify us. Now, number 16 is very important once again, just because if you're buying properties older than 1978, which for the most part are going to be the vast vast majority of properties in Ohio, you need to have this in, ensuring, essentially mentioning that you do not have any knowledge of prior lead-based paint within the specific properties. And number 17 is going to be essentially the same thing, but it goes over the disclosures for asbestos. Number 18 goes over the termination of the specific lease, mentioning that if the property is not returned to us as we gave it to them on the front end, there is going to be a $300 minimum cleaning fee. Number 19, which is another pretty important one, essentially mentions that within the final 30 days of tenancy, we are allowed to put a for rent or for sale sign if we plan to go ahead and rent it, or if they do not want to re-renew the lease. And we're allowed to show the property to other prospective tenants within 24-hour notice. Number 20 is essentially going over any potential disputes or legal issues, which are essentially going to go to arbitration, so we do not have to get sued. And number 21 is mentioning the governing law. Now, obviously, this is going to be dependent on where you live. Now, this lease is specified for Louisiana, so the governing law here would be in the state of Louisiana. Now, let's get into the final details here. And now, these are the top 3 clauses you need to have in any lease to protect yourself and maximize your cash flow. Number 1 is going to be the property management clause. This one is essentially mentioning that we have a property manager that's going to correspond and handle all sorts of communication with that specific tenant. For whatever reason, a lot of these Section 8 tenants like to speak to the owner. This essentially goes over the fact that they will communicate directly with the property manager and not to the owner, and they will essentially cooperate with the property manager to enter the property, do any inspections required, or facilitate any maintenance that has to go into the property as well. And it also mentions at the end, if they do not cooperate with that specific property manager, that could be a breach of lease or a breach of contract. Number 2, which is extremely important, once again, is going to be the lockout clause. This essentially says that if the tenant locks themselves out of the property, they are going to be responsible for paying any locksmith fees, which takes all the responsibility away from the owner, just in case they do end up locking themselves out of the property. So I don't have to have my property manager drive over there, give them a new key, drive back home, waste time going to Home Depot to make a replacement key, whatever the case may be. It puts the costs on the specific tenant for making the mistake of obviously losing the key. Or if there is a broken window because they did have to enter the property, it's also going to put that cost on the specific tenant once again. And number 3 is going to be the maintenance clause. This one is probably the most important out of the 3 that I'm going to mention right now. This goes over the tenant's specific responsibility within the property, what they're responsible to pay for, what they're responsible to do, and what the owner is responsible to pay for as well. Now, part 1 of this clause goes over that the tenant is responsible for any lawn care, landscaping, or potentially moving any snow from the driveways to maintain the property to ensure that we're not getting any city violations because the grass is too long, and obviously to remove snow from the driveways and their walkways. This is a big one that a lot of people do end up forgetting about, but it is extremely important to maintain your landscaping and obviously have this within your specific lease. The next part, which is probably just as important, shows that the tenant shall be responsible for replacing the light bulbs, HVAC filters, and batteries for any smoke detectors, and obviously maintaining routine upkeep items within the specific property itself. Now, this might not seem like a lot to replace a light bulb for a tenant, but just keep this in mind. Once you have 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 properties, it is extremely important just because it is going to waste the property manager's time to go from one property to the next and drive 15, 20, 30 minutes just to go check on a light bulb or replace an HVAC filter. Instead of doing that, it puts the responsibility on that specific tenant. And the third part, which is the most important part of this entire lease, says that the tenant shall be responsible to pay for the first $150 of every single repair. Now, I know this does sound ridiculous, but keep this in mind. Now, I know a lot of people will call me a slumlord for this, but it is extremely important to keep in mind that I do have a Section 8 inspection every single year. So if I was truly a slumlord and I was not maintaining my properties, I probably would have got kicked off of Section 8 already. We are maintaining every single one of the properties we have. What this clause essentially does is minimize our expenses within these properties. Instead of putting all the responsibilities on us for the mistakes that the tenants might have, it pushes a portion of the responsibility on that specific tenant, which makes them feel invested in that specific property. And it's shown to minimize our damage and our maintenance costs within these specific properties, just because the tenants don't necessarily want to have to be responsible for paying for them. So they ultimately just maintain and have better upkeep within the property itself. So with that being said, this is one of the Section 8 leases that I'm using. If you want to have access to my direct bulletproof lease that has costed me thousands of dollars to make with my attorney, comment Section 8 down below, and I'm going to send you this exact PDF so you could use it for your future Section 8 rental properties. Now let's go ahead and jump into exactly how to implement your new lease. For some context, you cannot change the terms of your lease in the middle of your lease. You need to wait until the renewal date or when the lease expires to be able to go ahead and implement these new clauses. And you need to give proper notice of changes, which is generally 30 to 60 days. And then for those existing tenants, you could have them sign a new lease at the renewal date. Now for new tenants, it's a completely different process. You would present them the lease after they've been accepted through the application process. You want to make sure that the property manager walks them through all of the different clauses to ensure that they've understood and they initialed every single one. And of course, you want to have a signed copy given to the tenant, and you want to save one for yourself and your property manager. Now generally, there's not much tenant pushback after we show them the lease, but keep in mind, most tenants are generally going to be logical once you've shown them the lease and you've explained everything thoroughly as to why it's important to have it in there. And if they do refuse at the end, it's generally a red flag and you could just move on to the next tenant. If you haven't already downloaded the free lease agreement template, make sure that you do that right now. And if you'd like to learn more about getting coached from me one-on-one in my private mentorship program, click the link down below and I'll show you exactly how to get started. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.